Hello and welcome back to us closing out the week here at the Damage Report. I'm John Irola. Very excited to have you here, especially because I don't have Brett here. Brett Ehrlich, host of the Happy Half Hour, usually joins me on Fridays, is out for the day for much earned vacation time. But we do have an absolutely packed, stuffed show to make up for that. We've got two congressional candidates who are going to be joining us from Texas and Indiana. So you're going to get to learn a little bit about some of the candidates. In fact, who are going to be having their primaries coming up on Super Tuesday. We are still going to finish out the week with garbage people. And because it's just me, it's not me and Brett, I've decided to compensate by giving you 3 garbage people who have all earned that title for the same reason, which doesn't often happen. So we're gonna be breaking that down as well. I did wanna let you know though, that while we've got a big day of news coverage today, tomorrow, we're not taking Saturday off because it is the South Carolina primary. And so TYT is going to be doing coverage of it. I believe we have a graphic. You can see there that I will be there, J.R. Jackson, Emma Vigeland, and Adrienne Lawrence as well. The coverage starts at 7 p.m. Eastern time, 4 p.m. Pacific time. We're gonna be breaking down the returns as they come in, giving our sort of, I guess, predictions of how it could potentially influence Super Tuesday, and also critiquing how the media is reacting to those returns. Because while we've made our predictions about who's likely to win on South Carolina, it's also important how the media reacts to it. And depending on who comes in first, I think that reaction might wildly change. So you can expect that tomorrow. But before we get to everything else on the rundown, and there is a lot to come, let's touch base a little bit with the government reaction in response to coronavirus. Everybody wants to know what is going on with coronavirus here in the United States and abroad. And if you've been watching this show throughout the week, you know that there's a lot of updates coming in every single day. And so accurate information is the most important thing. So let's talk about information. How are we going to, in the future, find out what's going on with coronavirus? It turns out that some avenues for information are being blocked off, while others that the Trump administration might not be big fans of are opening up. So let's talk about the blocking off first. The White House moved on Thursday to tighten control of coronavirus messaging by government health officials and scientists, directing them to coordinate all statements and public appearances with the office of Vice President Mike Pence, according to several officials familiar with the new approach. A lot of people reacted understandably to that news, saying that if the government is cracking down on, for instance, doctors, officials at the CDC, NIH, whichever government agency, from communicating about what's going on, that's probably not with the people's best interests at heart. And if Mike Pence is the one that they're gonna have to go through, we know that, again, Mike Pence was not chosen because of his mastery of the science, his knowledge of biology, or the international coordination against pandemics, none of that. He doesn't have any of that. What he does have is he's considered a rock solid loyalist to Donald Trump. And so if a CDC official has a bit of information that they want to spread, and it wouldn't look good for the Trump administration, they go to Mike Pence and they tell him, what happens then? Do we find out about that information? Will Mike Pence decide in that moment that public health concerns Trump's concerns? Do you believe that will happen? Fingers crossed, because we are in a life and death situation, quite literally. And the New York Times acknowledges that his move appears to be aimed at preventing the kind of contradictory statements from White House officials and top government health officials that have plagued the administration's response. So the New York Times there is being the New York Times, and they're not trying to say anything. They're just saying there has been disagreement. But you've been watching the show, you know what those disagreements look like. So you had doctors with the CDC earlier this week saying, look, we're gonna do everything we can, but we gotta keep it real. It is likely that coronavirus will spread, at least to some extent, in the United States. That is a possibility. That's simply the truth. It's not Trump's fault that happens. That's how this is going. 50 states have coronavirus infections at this point. We're a very large one. It is likely that it will happen. And so that doctor wanted to get that out. Trump doesn't like that. And so they're going to be cracking down on the ability of doctors to speak the truth. And Trump himself has been spreading misinformation as we've been covering. He continually in a campaign rally referenced 15 infections in the United States at a time when we had 60, kept saying 15 over and over. He made weird allusions to us sort of being down to one case. No one understands what he meant by that. He said that a vaccine is very close when doctors are saying it could take a year or a year and a half. And he's repeatedly said that the coronavirus is completely contained in the United States, which as we move on, you're gonna find out is 100% not true. And so yes, there are disagreements between top government officials and doctors in that Trump is lying and the doctors don't seem to have any incentive to do that. Now we're gonna get our information from one source, Mike Pence. And we'll just have to see how honest and accurate those bits of information are gonna be. And so as I alluded to, some avenues for information are being blocked off. It's all gonna have to go through Trump loyalists now. But thankfully, as in other instances where the Trump administration has done the wrong thing, we do have whistleblowers. And we already have one when it comes to the coronavirus. Apparently, officials at the Department of Health and Human Services sent more than a dozen workers to receive the first Americans evacuated from Wuhan, China, the epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak, without proper training for infection control or appropriate protective gear, according to a whistleblower complaint. We're gonna have more details in a second, but just understand that at the same time that obviously people are starting to freak out, in the Trump administration, totally justifiably, they're freaking out about the possibility that bringing people back could be dangerous and could spread the disease. They're like, okay, we got this. We're gonna go and we're gonna get those people and we'll just send anybody and they don't need the equipment and they don't need to be trained. Specifically to interact with people that they know are infected with coronavirus. Is it ignorance? Is it willful ignorance? Is it malicious? I can't imagine why it would be, but why would you send people into a situation like that without protective gear? And it's gonna get ridiculous in just a second as we go forward, but without training, without protective gear. Like it's entirely cruel for those people, let alone those that they could potentially infect when they get back to the United States and apparently weren't screened. They could spread it to friends and family, coworkers and things like that. Why would you not care enough to give them the training and the equipment? So let's move on. The complaint alleges that HHS staffers were improperly deployed, were not properly trained or equipped to operate in a public health emergency situation. The complaint also alleges the workers were potentially exposed to coronavirus because appropriate steps were not taken to protect them, and staffers were not trained in wearing personal protective equipment, even though they had face-to-face contact with returning passengers. And here is where it's like dark comedy. In some instances, the teams were working alongside personnel from the CDC in full gown, gloves, and hazmat attire. And so, look, my heart goes out to those workers who must have realized in the moment, we have people right there, they're right in front of me, they have coronavirus. The CDC is in full outbreak mode, and I've got nothing. Why is that? Is it because the CDC is being weirdly paranoid? Or is it because the people who sent me didn't know or care what I should do in this situation? And so look, hopefully all of those people are now being looked after, monitored, all of that. And hopefully perhaps this whistleblower account coming out means that in the future the government will be more responsible. Think twice or even once about the training and the equipment necessary when they send people into areas where coronavirus is not a possibility but indeed a guarantee. Hopefully that's a silver lining that could potentially come out of this. But I do want to move on to the last graphic because the whistleblower is now seeking federal protection, alleging that she was unfairly and improperly reassigned after raising concerns about the safety of those workers to HHS officials. She was told February 19th that if she does not accept a new position in 15 days, March 5th, she would be terminated entirely. And look, obviously it's a whistleblower. We don't know this individual's identity, but the Washington Post says that she has worked in the area of public health, this sort of field, for literally decades. And she was right in this instance. And so rather than listening to her, learning from it, they instead tried to quash it, and thankfully it has since come out, and they've tried to send her somewhere else and potentially fire her entirely. And we know how they approach in the Trump administration, that they approach whistleblowers, but again, the whistleblower was doing the right thing. That's what we're up against. Okay, there are more updates on that. We're gonna turn to coronavirus again a little bit later on the show. I want to move to a sort of bizarre, surreal area of coronavirus panic. So let's move on to this next topic. Right now, Corona, a beer that I've certainly had many times, perhaps you've had, they're in the middle of a $40 million rollout of their new Corona branded hard seltzer. And that seems like a slam dunk, right? I mean, people are crazy for White Claw, they've got that claw in them. But it turns out that it might not be a huge success through no fault of Corona's. Now, You know where this is going, right? Coronavirus is something people are talking about. Coronavirus. What more do you need to avoid drinking a beverage? Now, Constellation Brands, which brews several variations of Corona beer, say that its customers understand there's no link between the virus and our business. One would hope, but that isn't necessarily the case, because when Corona had a tweet about the upcoming launch of their hard seltzer, replies to the tweet said the ad is in poor taste and that the brand should lay low for a few weeks. It's not just one. Okay, now look. At the end of the day, is this just some people on Twitter? 100% this is just some people on Twitter, but it wasn't just one or two. The predominant view I saw, and I looked in those replies, was, come on guys, I mean, I know you're not actually virus beer, but couldn't you just not promote your products for a month or two? Because other people slightly crazier than me might lose it over it. That person knows that they're wrong, but still says that Corona should not roll out their new hard seltzer because of international disease concerns. And here's the thing, those few people aren't apparently the only ones. Take a look at this, this is put together by YouGov. They occasionally do these sort of brand buzz trackers, and you can see going back to March 2018, what's the Corona buzz? Well, the buzz since the first coronavirus case was detected seems to be negative, because it is down to, at least for the last few years, a new low. And it has just been trending down, down, down. Despite the fact, and I don't think really that we can point this out enough, it's not a bottle of disease. It's just beer. You may not like it. It's not necessarily the highest quality beer. You know, it certainly needs the fruit infusion that a slice of lime will bring. But it's just beer, and it's probably not gonna give you a disease. And by the way, I just wanna go one step further. 5W Public Relations, they did a poll. It said that 38% of Americans wouldn't buy Corona, quote, under any circumstances because of the outbreak. And another 14% said they wouldn't order a Corona in public. Now, is this a poll of just between 700 and 800 people? Yes. Is it a poll of just beer drinkers? Yes. Is it a phone poll? Yes. Does it mean what it seems when you just hear that number? No, not necessarily, but people are fundamentally irrational. 40% wouldn't order it under any circumstances. Why? Because it's a big bottle full of virus, I guess. Thank you for the B-roll. What you see there is an orange liquid that is alcoholic. It's a good way to end the day. That's about it. It's not a good way to end your life, not in the short term anyway. You really don't have to worry about coronavirus. And this is the thing, it's just a microcosm of how people lose it over people coming from a certain part of the world. They can see a person that looks like they might have come from China and they'll lose it. They see a person coughs and they lose it. I coughed earlier. People around me lost it. No, not really, but it's happening these days. So that's why I'm saying, look, I'm going to be as honest as I can about the news that I see around coronavirus, and some of it is going to be dark. But we should be only as freaked out as we really should be. We should not necessarily change our choice of beverage based on these concerns. Okay, with that, we're gonna take a short break. Lots more after this.
We need to talk about a relatively new show called the Republic, or UNFTR. As a Young Turks fan, you already know that the government, the media, and corporations are constantly peddling lies that serve the interests of the rich and powerful. But now there's a podcast dedicated to unraveling those lies, debunking the conventional wisdom. In each episode of the Republic, or UNFTR, the host delves into a different historical episode or topic that's generally misunderstood or purposely obfuscated by the so-called powers that be. Featuring in-depth research, razor-sharp commentary, and just the right amount of vulgarity, the UNFTR podcast takes a sledgehammer to what you thought you knew about some of the nation's most sacred historical cows. But don't just take my word for it. The New York Times described UNFTR as consistently compelling and educational, aiming to challenge conventional wisdom and upend the historical narratives that were taught in school. For as the great philosopher Yoda once put it, you must unlearn what you have learned. And that's true whether you're in Jedi training or you're uprooting and exposing all the propaganda and disinformation you've been fed over the course of your lifetime. So search for UNFTR in your podcast app today and get ready to get informed, angered, and entertained all at the same time.
Joining us now is congressional candidate for Indiana's 6th District, Jeannine Lee Lake. Welcome to the Damage Report.
Thank you very much, John. Nice to be here again.
Yeah, glad to talk to you again, especially when we're getting so close now. When exactly is the primary to start off?
May 5th, Indiana. Be there or be square.
Exactly. So it's getting into crunch time, and we want to make sure that just in case people weren't around before, aren't familiar with you and your background, if you could just introduce yourself to people who might have joined the show since then.
Yes, my name is Jeannine Lee Lake, JeannineLeeLakeForCongress.com, and I am running in Indiana's 6th District, and I am running for the Democratic nomination on May the 5th, and I expect to win. I won last year. I beat out 5 guys here in Indiana to win, and now I have 2 opponents that I think collectively have run since the 1980s, maybe 14 or 15 times. They are wonderful gentlemen, great ideas, but I think we're going to prevail, and so my next step would be to run against Greg Pence again in November.
Oh, we're definitely going to talk about Greg Pence. Don't worry about that. But in terms of your platform, what are some of the biggest differences between yourself and your 2 opponents in this primary?
Well, John, I like to say that I have skin in the game. And by that, I mean that my passion for running is based on the idea that not only am I a woman, but I'm also an African American. I'm a person of color that is very concerned about where we're at in this country right now. We are at a moment of crisis. We have a lot of division coming out straight from the Oval Office through what I believe is a cruel administration. I don't necessarily believe that my opponents maybe are as passionate about those same issues that I am, and I don't know. I mean, I just there was no choice for me to run again. Mm-hmm. Evil is out there. It's on the side, I believe, of Trump and the Pences both, despite the fact that they present themselves as the pious Pences. But for me, it wasn't much of a choice. Now we do think, I think we stand together on Medicare for all, education, affordable health care, that kind of thing. So those things we are similar in.
I think this ties in pretty well with what you were just saying, but we notice in one section of your platform under civil rights and civil liberties, you invoke your Christian faith multiple times. Can you tell me a little bit about how that influences your politics, especially when you might be running against someone who has a slightly different view on the intersection of Christianity and politics?
Well, I'm a proud Christian Democrat, but I'm also 100% a believer in separation of church and state. I think that my values and my faith can direct me in terms of being a good person, but without a doubt, I'm very respectful of other faiths, Muslim faith, the Catholic faith, Hindu, whatever. Or people that decide that they are, don't necessarily have a particular denomination or faith, agnostics, atheists, that kind of thing. I have very much respect for that. You could be a good person without believing in any kind of deity. I've got many friends who are agnostic and atheist, and they trust me. They go right behind me when we are delivering hot meals with a group called Feed My Sheep that I chair. They're at every single event that I'm at with regards to NAACP issues, Black Lives Matter issues. I do believe that, like I said, I'm a proud Democrat, but I'm also a person that understands that you don't have to be of any faith to be a good person.
Okay, and Jeannine, you're as you've alluded to, you're running against Greg Pence, brother of Mike Pence. Does his last name is that helping him in his run? Do you think is that going to make it easier or harder when you go against him?
Well, I believe that, for him, this is a red state. We haven't had a Democratic congressperson in this district for 25 years. But I believe I'm the candidate. I've decided to run again. Like I said before, I have skin in the game. I have passion for the game to be able to run again as a strong candidate. I think while he has probably $2.8 million still in his coffers, and we have just a little under 1,000, I do believe that over the last couple of years, him not going to not one town hall, not scheduling any town halls or public meetings with people, that he hasn't already hand selected. I think that'll go against him. The idea that he only pretty much talks to people that have an R behind their names. He still refused to, throughout the whole candidacy, the campaign that I ran in 2018, he refused to debate me. And he's just not, he's not understanding that in the word representative, there is that word present. And he hasn't been that. It's pretty good, John, isn't it? So, yeah, we're trying to get him to come on board and meet actually some of the people that voted for him, as well as the people that didn't vote for him, like myself. We still need to be represented.
Yeah. And I know that you're planning a series of Greg Pence-less town halls. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, since he's decided that he doesn't want to go out and meet the public, I decided I'd use that famous Pence name, and with a little, I guess tailoring at the end, and go out and have my own town halls. We've got a lot of issues here in Indiana, which involve low teacher pay. Some of the things that people are concerned about here, common sense gun reform. Like I said, health issues. Right now, they've had the scare of the coronavirus is out there, and even though I think there's 26 people in Indiana that have already been tested and are under watch of the state health department, that's a concern for us, particularly because we were under Governor Pence, who had a terrible part with regards to the HIV scare that was in Scott County. He refused to actually approve and sign off on a needle exchange program, which was really devastating to the southern part of Indiana. They went from having 29 cases to tripling that to almost 79 cases in the month. They literally begged our then Governor Mike Pence to help them. And so, we've got a lot of concerns over here in Indiana.
Yeah, and I wonder what effect Mike Pence's elevation to the coordinator of our national response to coronavirus after, as you pointed out, the negative impact he had on the explosion of HIV cases, his editorial saying in 2001 that smoking isn't bad for your health. Is that the sort of thing that you think is going to be damaging to Greg Pence, to be affiliated with that sort of anti-science, ignorant approach to the threats we face?
Well, one of the things that Greg Pence has said repeatedly is that there's no daylight between his views and that of his younger brother, Mike Pence, as well as President Donald Trump. Which in itself is very scary for people like me and other people that do believe in science. We do believe in climate change. We do believe that windmills do not cause cancer. So we would like and are hoping that, that there is a change in terms of him being the mouthpiece and the messaging man for this serious pandemic. It's not a funny thing for us here in Indiana, because we've seen what happens when a Pence is in charge of something of this magnitude and concerning our health.
Yeah. Well, Jeannine Lee Lake, congressional candidate in the 6th District of Indiana, we appreciate you joining us once again.
Well, thank you very much, John, for having me on, and I look forward to seeing you guys hopefully after the primary.
Sounds good. We're gonna take a short break here. When we come back, voter suppression concerns in the midterms in Georgia just got some fuel thrown on those fires with revelations of how the man behind them was gleeful at the coverage that it was getting at the time. We'll give you all those details after this.
The Georgia Secretary of State reportedly purged more than 500,000 voters from the rolls, blocked thousands of new registrations, and closed polling places, all while he was a candidate for governor.
There you have Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez talking at a meeting of the House Oversight and Reform Committee. They were doing a panel on voting rights in minority communities, and the voter suppression that happened in that race in Georgia for the 2018 midterms, we talked about a lot at the time. It was absolutely horrendous. It came in about as many forms as the Republican Party has been able to develop over recent decades. And it was even more ridiculous because, as AOC points out there, Brian Kemp was the Secretary of State. He was tasked with overseeing the elections, running in an election at the same time, and refused to recuse himself from potentially influencing an election that he was in. I say potentially, He definitely did it. We know 100% that he did. But here's the thing. She's right to point out all of the various efforts to suppress the vote, like closing down polling places, changing dates, purging voter rolls, all sorts of things like that. But at the time, we now know Brian Kemp and his campaign staff, they knew what was going on, and they honestly kind of thought the whole thing was a little bit funny. Let me give you a couple of quotes that have come out. In September 2017, then Secretary of State Kemp emailed with campaign advisors about a media report discussing efforts to correct a, quote, string of problems with county officials' attempts to challenge the registration of hundreds of voters. The report concluded that, quote, the errors may have violated federal law. It seems like a huge issue there. But Mr. Kemp responded by congratulating his campaign team, writing, quote, good work. This story is so complex, folks will not make it all the way through it. A top campaign staffer, David Dove, agreed that the article, quote, won't help draw eyeballs. So as these watchdogs are saying that the efforts to purge voters might be breaking federal law, their concern was not that they'd done the wrong thing, that they had stopped some of their potential constituents from voting, not even that they might have mistakenly broken the law. It was, okay, whatever we did, it's kind of hard to get across in a headline, and so people might not catch on to what we were doing. That's what they said. And again, these are their emails that have now been revealed where they felt freed up to be honest about what was going on, but it actually gets even a little bit worse than that. So in October 2017, after purging more than 500,000 voters from rolls, Mr. Kemp and Mr. Dove, the same two from before, emailed on their personal accounts mocking a press release from a Democratic candidate warning that Georgia is, quote, systematically deleting voters who have done nothing wrong and that, quote, Georgia is trying to make it harder to vote. Mr. Dove forwarded the press release to Mr. Kemp writing us with laughing emojis. Mr. Kemp replied us with a smiling emoji. So at the time, the Democratic Party in Georgia rightfully was pointing out that this wasn't like, look, any purge is terrible. This is literally 500,000 people in one go. And that was not the only one. That was just one of the many things that was done by the Georgia Republican Party to purge voters. And they thought it was funny. They're putting funny, happy, smiley, winky, laughing emojis as it was going on. And again, it would be bad enough if it was Republican Joe Schmo running for that seat. But it was the Secretary of State. The sanctity of the voting process, that's his job. That should have been his obligation, his duty, his responsibility. But he just thought the whole thing was funny because everything that was being uncovered, it wouldn't have any consequences for him, except if it did, it would be positive in that those people would not be able to vote. He certainly didn't go to federal prison for it or anything like that. Here's the thing. He at the time was pitching himself as someone who took voter fraud very seriously. What you should know is that of the 23.5 million votes cast in 42 jurisdictions in 2016, including 8 of the 10 with the highest concentration of non-citizens nationally. This is one of the concerns always raised by Republicans that non-citizens will vote. Only 30 were even flagged for fraud investigation or prosecution, according to the Brennan Center for Justice. That's 0.0001%. It is the biggest made up hoax, fraud concern. It is in real numbers, not an actual concern. And for those Republicans, it's not a real concern either. It is used to justify the attempts that they make to suppress the vote, that's all. And it's made even more obvious, more laughable, because the guy who says he cares about the sanctity of the vote, and that's why you have to do the purges. You just have to make sure that there's no one who's voting who shouldn't be, even though the numbers show that that's not a concern whatsoever. In 2016, after a cybersecurity researcher found hacking vulnerabilities in Georgia's digital voting system, a range of experts called on Kemp to return to paper ballots. Kemp not only refused to do so, he declined to fix the vulnerabilities themselves. The same month, he spoke out against federal efforts to reclassify the American election system as, quote, critical infrastructure, because doing so would have let the Department of Homeland Security offer him cybersecurity support. So the guy whose only concern is making sure that the vote is valid didn't care about the vulnerabilities, didn't care about having a paper trail, and certainly didn't want to allow the feds to come in and assist Georgia in getting their stuff together. And again, bear in mind, it's not like it would be Obama doing it. This is the Trump federal government that he didn't want getting involved in whatever he was doing in Georgia's election system. And look, the great thing is that those emails came out, people are talking about it. AOC and others are shedding new light on what happened there, and hopefully there will be full investigations. But I have to say that while it certainly looks bad for him and hopefully will fire up people to actually get involved in elections to make sure that this doesn't happen, the chance that he will face any sort of consequences, legal or political, that seems ridiculous to even imagine. And we can point out all of the things that he did. We can point out that he was laughing about it in real time, but he's still the governor today. He won that election, and he potentially has the power to get involved the next time he decides to run. I don't know exactly what the solution is, but hopefully AOC and others who actually care about these issues will do something about it. Okay, with that, we do have to take a short break. Another candidate is going to join us after this. Joining us now on the show is a congressional candidate who's hoping to represent Texas's 31st district. Donna Imam, welcome to the Damage Report.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you here, and in particular, it was pointed out by Edwin, who's in the studio with me right now, that you're working to potentially represent part of Austin, which I lived in for a number of years. So I'm certainly interested in them having the right representation. For people who might not be familiar with you and what you're bringing to the race, could you tell them a little bit about your candidacy?
Yeah, so I'm a computer engineer and have a 18-year career in technology. I ran a nonprofit for the last 5 years, which provides training and education completely free. And what I realized is that too many people have been left behind. And I came to this realization actually very early on in my career when every single assembly worker at the company that I worked for was laid off. Their jobs moved to Mexico. And the worst thing is that many of them never had any retraining opportunities. Many of them never was able to work again. And this is what, impacted me in a big way. When I did the nonprofit, what I realized is that we have big system challenges, and unless people like myself that just work for a living come out and participate in the solution, we're not going to be able to solve these, and that's why I'm running.
I know with a candidate, especially for you, you're coming from a slightly different angle than some others. We're so used to it's just a constant series of either people who've run for other offices or lawyers, that sort of thing. I know that you did an AMA on Reddit recently, and I'm curious both how that went, and also were there any questions that sort of came out of left field or were a surprise to you?
There were some really great questions posed by many, many different people. In fact, our Reddit AMA got more upvotes than any other congressional candidate's AMA in the recent, past. There were lots of interesting questions. The things that I really love reading on there is when you have people in district and they say, I've heard about you, or I saw your sign, or I got your letter, or you knocked on my door. Your canvasser, your volunteer knocked on our door. And that's what got us, curious about what you were running on. That's the big change that we're trying to bring to Texas's 31st district. Many people outside of Texas believe that Texas is completely red. What they don't realize is the demographics of Texas have changed significantly, especially in Austin, Texas, because of the growth. And the way you flip red districts like ours is by having these one-on-one conversations. What happens when most candidates run is they're focused on fundraising, and they want you to fundraise so you can run TV ads. But we have to understand the general public today doesn't necessarily watch TV. You have to be able to knock on that door and let them know this race is so close, only 2.9%. And in terms of votes, it was only 8,000 votes by which the current 9-term Trump-endorsed Build the Wall representative won. So we can do this, and these are the conversations we're having. What I hope to do for this district will hopefully be a framework that anybody can use anywhere in the United States, where you develop a framework on how to communicate and engage the voter, give them something to vote for, tell them how close it is, and if they come out, it matters. And that's what we're trying to do different. And when we had this AMA, we were able to kind of answer people's questions regarding that. The one question that did come up over and over is, as an engineer, as an electrical and computer engineer, What can you bring that the average candidate doesn't bring to this game? And so those were kind of interesting questions. If you want to check out the Reddit AMA, you can see how I answered all of that.
You know, the people should definitely do that. You were talking there about the framework that you're trying to develop for, running this sort of candidacy, but especially to flip a red district. And so, through the experience that you've accrued, what are some misconceptions that people might have about running this sort of campaign that might stop some of them from running themselves, maybe?
So I will tell you this: the system is created so that working people cannot participate. Imagine if you have to spend, they expect you to spend something like 6 to 8 hours a day calling people and asking for money. Because if you don't raise hundreds of thousands of dollars, it's very difficult for you to do an outreach to 300, 400,000 people who are the voters. If you look at my incumbent right now, he has more than $750,000 already in his war chest. So the system does not want working people to participate. It's extremely difficult. But the way we are going to change this is by going out to the voter and giving them the message in terms that they understand. A lot of times, we talk about terms like Medicare for all, or we may talk about terms like Green New Deal, or even democratic socialism. These words are not necessarily well understood and perceived by the average general voter. The general voter is hearing bits and pieces, and they're bombarded by so many messages from mainstream media, whether that's conservative or whether that's considered liberal or centrist, whatever it may be. So the biggest challenge for someone who's running in these districts is being able to make that one-on-one contact. And the way we do that is we have to inspire the community to come together, because it is not about the person who runs. Nobody will win an election because they're great, and nobody can win an election just because they raise millions of dollars. We've seen this over and over again, where establishment candidates, have outspent grassroots candidates by millions of dollars, and they still have lost. And the reason is this: if we can take the message to the voter, if we can inspire the voter to come together, then we can flip any district you want. The reason that we have new representation is not because you just have a great candidate, and it's not because they can raise a lot of money. It's even sometimes not because of the message, but it's because the people in that district realize they have something to vote for, and they demand it. And the way they demand it is by knocking on their neighbors' doors. So we're trying to create this framework which allows each person to go and talk to their neighbors and let them know why they're voting one way or the other. If you're only walking your neighborhood, which you might do with your dog anyways in the evening, then guess what? All of a sudden, you can now cover every neighborhood in the country.
And look, especially in your neighborhood, knowing what the Austin area is like, it seems like they're due for some new representation. So certainly, best of luck in your campaign ahead. Where can people find out more about your candidacy?
Well, I'm at votefordonna.com, and we're a grassroots campaign. I just want your listeners to know one thing. We, as congressional candidates, do not get countrywide exposure. So for a candidate like me to be able to win, and we can flip this district, and we're going to flip this district on Medicare for all. I'm the only candidate for Medicare for all in this district. We're going to show you how to do it, but please, if you can, make a $5 donation today. It will make a huge difference. We will get out the vote on Super Tuesday, which is just 2 days away, and we're going to flip this district for you.
Okay, that's a great closer right there. Donna Imam, thank you so much for joining us once again.
Thanks, John.
We're gonna take one last break. When we come back, let's close out the week the way we've grown accustomed to, by taking out the trash on Garbage People. And now it's time to take out the trash. This is Garbage People. So I know it sounds weird, but normally Garbage People is a joyous time where Brett and I have a little bit of fun surprising each other with our picks, but I'm all alone in the studio today. It's just me and Trashy. So I decided, You know what, I'm gonna make it into a crowd by choosing not one, not two, but 3 garbage people. So let's start off with Don Jr. But here's the thing, Don Jr. isn't alone in why he is living that garbage lifestyle. Pete Hegseth and Mick Mulvaney are all garbage people this week for the same reason. We're gonna show you some video clips from today, and let's see if you can notice the common trend. First, here is literally the president's son on Fox and Friends.
But for them to try to take a pandemic and seemingly hope that it comes here and kills millions of people so that they could end Donald Trump's streak of winning is a new level of sickness. You know, I don't know if this is coronavirus or Trump derangement syndrome, but these people are infected badly.
Okay, so there he's talking about the New York Times and the media generally. I think he just accused the New York Times of having coronavirus in an attempt to make a joke, but that was the president's son on Fox and Friends, the most influential political show, possibly even beating The View. Remember, he's the one who's just involved in the business. He's not doing all the political stuff, despite the fact that he controls the business, talks at Trump rallies, goes on Fox and Friends, all of that. But he said that people in the media, presumably like me, who are trying to give people accurate information about coronavirus, want millions of Americans to die so that Trump will lose and we can rule over the ashes of what remains of our disease-ridden apocalyptic country. That's absurd. But notice that it wasn't like the 3 hosts cut in like, whoa, okay, hold on. We have some disagreements, but I don't think that Rachel Maddow wants millions of people to die of disease. But look, I have some general points I'm gonna make, but here's the thing. Don Jr. is not the only person who's been spreading this suspiciously all on the same day. Here is Pete Hegseth.
I don't want to say this. It's not, I don't relish the reality, but you start to feel, you really do, watch the Democrats, watch the media, you start to feel like they're rooting for coronavirus to spread. And I don't say that flippantly, I really don't. But they're rooting for it to grow. They're rooting for the problem to get worse. They're rooting for mysteries, unknown cases, quarantines, towns, for it to become an absolute national crisis for one reason and one reason alone. They have yet to find a reason to try to drag down the presidency of Donald Trump.
Okay, look, I'm gonna admit that when Pete Hegseth, who was like this close to being the head of the VA under Trump, said that people in the media like me want it to spread, I thought that was pretty bombastic and offensive, but then he said he's not saying it flippantly, and that reassured me. By the way, I think it's pretty rich for him to say that the media is like rooting for a disease to spread, coming from a guy who's literally said on air that he hasn't washed his hands in 10 years. By the way, if you're worried about coronavirus, wash your hands. And so that's Pete Hegseth, the president's son. You have a media personality who was almost in the Trump administration, and it goes as high as Mick Mulvaney himself, acting chief of staff. Here he is at CPAC.
The reason you're saying so much attention to it today is that they think this is going to be what brings down the president. That's what this is all about. I got a note today from a reporter saying, "What are you going to do today to calm the markets?" And I'm like, really, what I might do today to calm the markets is tell people to turn their televisions off for 24 hours.
Yeah, he went on to say it's not Ebola. Like, yeah, the fatality rate is lower than Ebola, but thousands of people are dying. So look, is it offensive that they're saying the media wants millions of Americans to die if it hurts Trump's favorability rating? Yes, but the biggest issue and the reason that Pete Hegseth and let's see, what do we got? Mick Mulvaney. And I think we got room for, we're almost out of space for trash, that they belong in there, is that they're telling their audience, conservative Republicans, if you hear bad news about coronavirus, don't trust it. It's a hoax by the media to scare you away from supporting Donald Trump. In fact, turn off the TV. So in a time when you need accurate information to make sure that you and your family stay safe, don't trust anyone who tries to tell you about this disease. They're probably just biased. They're probably just lying to you. They're willing to potentially endanger the lives of their own supporters to help Donald Trump. Okay, that's all the time we have. I'm gonna be doing the main show though with Emma and JR, so I will see you then. Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Damage Report. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, John Adarola. I'll see you soon.